Welcome to my channel. I'm Nancy Thompson, your storyteller of folk tales, thrilling mysteries, and all sorts of intriguing topics. Join me for today's tale, set back in the days of colonial America. In the time of the early settlers, there was a small village called Kingston Hollow, tucked away in the township of Golden Springs, Virginia. It wasn't much to look at, a sleepy little place. If you were passing through, you'd hardly give it a second glance. But the most famous person in Kingston Hollow? That would be Liam Anderson's mother, Abigail. Folks said Abigail was descended from a long line of wise seers, maybe even tracing back to the old prophets of legend. Though she was a woman, Abigail had a rare gift for fortune-telling, stronger than anyone around. Ordinary folks who came begging her to read their futures? She'd turn them away flat. Why? Because every prediction she made chipped away at her own lifespan. There's an old saying, the secrets of fate ain't meant to be spilled. The more she revealed, the shorter her days grew. So Abigail had uprooted her life countless times, dragging her son Liam along, just to dodge the desperate souls hunting her down for answers. She hardly ever left the house, sent Liam out to fetch groceries instead. Liam understood his mom's struggles, but deep down, he resented her for it. Her special talent meant he'd never had a normal childhood, never felt the kind of love other kids got. They'd moved so often, always on the run, until they finally settled in Kingston Hollow. 10 years they'd stayed there, the longest stretch anywhere. The villagers had no clue who Abigail really was, and for once, they lived in peace. Liam's 20th birthday had just passed when Abigail called him to her side. "Son," she said, "these 10 years here have been the happiest of our lives. But my time's running out. It's all fate, I can feel it. I don't have long left." Liam had always known this day would come, but not so soon. He'd thought hiding out in Kingston Hollow, refusing to help outsiders, might have stretched her years. But the secrets she'd spilled in the past had already carved away at her life, day by day. Holding her hand, he said, "Ma, I know it ain't been easy for you. I'm sorry I never got married, never gave you grandkids to dote on or took care of you proper." Abigail brushed his hair gently, gripping his hand tight. Liam felt it then, a warm, powerful surge flowing into him. It was like she was passing on the last of her spirit, her energy, right before the end. When it was done, Abigail closed her eyes and slipped away, never to wake again. Liam followed her final wishes to the letter. Keeping things simple and quiet, he buried her in a spot she'd picked herself, a patch of land on a hillside overlooking the countryside. Per her instructions, he fixed a protective charm to her coffin, something to keep it hidden from prying eyes. Once the burial was done, Liam trudged down the hill. He hadn't even made it home when he spotted two strangers lurking near his door, peering inside like they were up to no good. Standing behind them, he cleared his throat loud enough to startle them. "Who you looking for?" he demanded. The pair jumped, then bowed their heads respectfully. "We're from out of town, sir," one said. "Willow Creek, to be exact. Our boss sent us to fetch Liam the carpenter to fix up his place." Turns out, Liam was a carpenter by trade. Sure, his mom's influence had rubbed off on him, he had a knack for sensing things, but he'd sworn off her path. Instead, he'd chosen woodworking, a craft that earned him respect. Plus, he'd picked up some old tricks from his ma, blending her fortune-telling know-how with carpentry. When he built a house or a piece of furniture, he could dodge all sorts of trouble for the folks who lived there. In Golden Springs, Liam had made a name for himself as a skilled craftsman. Big families would wait weeks for him to free up, insisting he be the one to fix their homes. He'd just finished burying his mom when these two showed up with a job offer, one he'd agreed to a month back. "All right," he said. "I'll head out tomorrow morning. You two go on ahead." The pair nodded politely, thanked him, and took off. Willow Creek wasn't too far from Kingston Hollow, but it'd still take some travel. The next day, before the sun even peeked over the horizon, Liam was up. Back when his mom was alive, he'd always check her room before heading out. Now, out of habit, he wandered in again. Empty. They say real men don't cry easy, but right then, tears streamed down his face like a busted dam. After a while, he pulled himself together, remembering he wasn't up early to mope, he had work to do. So, he packed his toolbox and hit the road. From Kingston Hollow to Willow Creek, you had to cross a ridge. Liam hadn't gone far when his stomach started growling. Spotting some wild berries along the trail, he figured he had time, climbed a tree, and stuffed a handful in his bag to snack on later. Time ticked by, and the sky should have been lightening up, but as Liam neared the far side of the ridge, it stayed dark. The air got thick and damp. He had a bad feeling. Rain was coming. He picked up the pace. Just as he broke into a jog, a bolt of lightning ripped through the sky, splitting a big oak not far off clean in two. Liam froze. Keep running, and the next bolt might fry him. Stay put under a tree, and he'd still be a target. Either way, he was toast. Panicking, he recalled some of his mom's old tricks, dousing fate with a quick calculation. The signs said he'd live. Heart pounding, he bolted forward. Another flash cracked down, striking him square. He blacked out cold on the mountain path. Weird thing was, when the bolt faded, the sky cleared up like nothing happened. Liam came to, blinking at a grassy patch ahead. Stumbling forward a few steps, he saw her, Abigail, his mom, standing there. "Second year since I left," she said. "This is as far as I can shield you, Liam. The rest of the road's yours alone." He didn't get it. Lunging to ask more, she vanished. He was alone again, hollering "Ma!" into the emptiness. Then he snapped awake for real, back on the mountain trail. That split oak still loomed in the distance. Shaking off the dream, he remembered his mom's words and his job in Willow Creek. Dusting himself off, he kept moving. The Willow family was big shots in town. Finding their place wouldn't be hard. He knocked on their gate, and a servant ushered him into the sprawling Willow estate. Something odd hit him right off. Everyone he passed, servants, townsfolk he'd asked for directions, kept snickering behind their hands, pointing at him. Finally, he met Mr. Willow, the head of the house, who burst out laughing. "Liam, what's with the hairdo? First time I've seen anything like it." He handed Liam a mirror. One look, and Liam groaned. Thanks to that lightning, his hair was sticking straight up like a porcupine. No wonder folks were cracking up. He splashed some water on it, flattening it back to normal. Mr. Willow led him to the kitchen. "Here's the deal," he said. "I want a storage shed built right out front here. A place to stash our grain. We've got tenants bringing in harvests, and I want to keep it all under one roof, build up our stock, make this house a powerhouse of wealth year after year." Liam nodded. Mr. Willow was a businessman through and through, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He got to work, sketching out a plan on the empty patch by the kitchen door. Liam got started on the shed, calling in some hired hands from the Willow estate to dig a big pit. Together with a few extra workers Mr. Willow roped in, they shaped it into an oval foundation. Once the outline was set, the real building began. Golden Springs had rainy summers, so a grain shed had to be watertight and damp-proof. Liam knew he'd need more than carpentry skills for this. He needed a mason. At his request, Mr. Willow sent his steward to fetch one. When the mason arrived, a gruff but talented guy named Tom Brickman, Liam's ears perked up. A voice whispered in his head, "This here's a famous mason in town. What an honor to work with him. I'd love a raise for this." Liam glanced around. No one was talking. Could he hear Tom's thoughts? Before he could puzzle it out, another voice cut in, this one sharper, middle-aged. "What's so special about a grain shed? Can't even do it alone, needs a mason. If it falls apart, I'll have the old man chew you out." Liam froze. That was the steward's voice, but the guy hadn't said a word out loud. What in tarnation was happening? Ever since that lightning strike, something was off. Maybe surviving it had sparked some kind of gift, like his mom's, only different. He could hear what folks were thinking. Shaking it off, he focused on the job. The steward might have been a sourpuss, but Liam liked Tom's humble attitude. They got along fine, hammering and laying stone together. Building a shed like this was slow, careful work. Where most might slap one together in a week, Liam took 10 days. He was a perfectionist, had to be, with his reputation. Mr. Willow dropped by often to check progress, and through his thoughts, Liam heard, "This is worth every penny. Slow's fine, quality beats quantity any day." Rich folks, Liam figured, cared more about the long haul than a quick fix. By the 10th day, the shed was nearly done. Liam planned to head home tomorrow. That night, after supper, he took a stroll by the estate's back pond to unwind. Stretching his legs, he kicked at the dirt when another voice piped up, "Should I get close to this carpenter? If he could save the miss, that'd be something." She's locked up tight by the old man. Liam looked down. A white rabbit sat there, tame as a house pet, staring up at him. He didn't dare speak, afraid he'd spook it, but his mind raced. He could hear animals now too. The rabbit hopped closer, brushing his pant leg like it wanted him to follow. Curious, Liam trailed it through a narrow, shadowy hallway in the estate. Halfway down he stopped, muttering to himself, "What am I doing chasing a rabbit? This ain't my house, get caught snoopin', and I'm in hot water." The rabbit twitched its ears, almost like it understood, and Liam heard, "Hey Carpenter, I was wondering if I should take you to the girl's cell. Now you're hemmin' and hawin', man up." It didn't know he could hear it. After wrestling with himself, Liam pressed on. The rabbit led him to a small outbuilding, eerie and strange. 2 white lanterns hung by the door, and a weird symbol was carved into the lock. Liam's gut twisted. His mom had taught him about signs like that. Trouble. Good thing he knew a few tricks from her too. Fiddling with the lock, he cracked it open, glancing over his shoulder every step to make sure no one saw. Inside, a woman lay on a cot, pale as death, barely breathing. That symbol, her sunken face, Liam reckoned she'd been hexed, cursed into some half-dead state. He pulled out a peachwood charm his mom had given him for protection and pressed it to her forehead. Like magic, her eyes fluttered open. She shrank back, terrified, curling into a ball and shrieking, "Stay away! I'll die before I let you near me." It took a while to calm her down. "I'm just a carpenter," he said. "Here to fix the shed. Stumbled in by accident. No harm meant." Finally she settled, tears streaming as she sobbed out her story. Halfway through, footsteps echoed down the hall. The rabbit huddled by Liam's feet, trembling like it was warning him. Thinking fast, he pressed the peachwood to her forehead again. She passed out cold. He slipped out, locked the door behind him, and hid atop the hallway's rafters just as someone approached. In the dark he couldn't make out the figure's face, but their thoughts rang clear. "Gotta check on her, can't let her wake up yet." Liam's blood ran cold. He knew that voice in his head. It was Mr. Willow. Whatever this was, it was bad news. To avoid trouble, he hightailed it back to his room before anyone spotted him. Liam overslept the next morning, waking as dawn broke. Last night's weirdness gnawed at him. This place wasn't safe. He needed to finish and get out. By afternoon, he and Tom wrapped up the shed. It had been a tough job, but the pay was double his usual rate. Worth it, he figured. He said goodbye to Tom and headed off, checking the sky. No rain this time. He wasn't taking chances after that lightning stunt. At a roadside stall, he grabbed 2 jugs of cider, one for him, one to pour out later if he passed his mom's grave on the ridge. The trek wore him down, sweat beading on his brow. Halfway up, he spotted a big oak and decided to rest. Plucking a broad leaf to shade his face, he dozed off under the tree. When he woke, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky red. Pretty sight, but as he stretched, he heard voices, hissing ones. 2 snakes coiled nearby, chatting. "Honey," one said, "we've been huntin' forever. Finally found that grave's entrance today. Problem is, her kid sealed it tight, ain't easy to crack." The other hissed back, "So what? We've gotta get in, sealed or not. What about the little one in my belly?" The first sighed, "Yeah, all cause of that rotten Willow guy. If he hadn't roped us in, we wouldn't be slavin' for him, digging up some dead woman's tomb for our kid's sake." Liam stayed stock still, leaf covering him, listening hard. The snake slithered off, but then the female gasped, collapsing onto her mate. "Darlin', I can't, I think the baby's comin'," she wheezed. The male panicked, coiling around her. "We gotta find Willow." She snapped, "No way. He's got us under his thumb already. If he knows I'm in trouble, he'll use it to squeeze us harder. We're dead either way, but our kid, he'd own him." They hissed and thrashed, scaring off every critter nearby. Liam didn't want to meddle, he just wanted home, but the snake's labor tugged at him. Plus, they'd mentioned his mom's grave. What was going on? Standing, he stepped forward. "I see you're strugglin' to birth that young un," he said. "Savon a life's worth, more than buildin' a tower. I'll help." The male snake darted at him, but Liam didn't flinch. Even a rattler couldn't faze him now. "You can hear us?" it hissed, tongue flicking. "Darn right," Liam shot back. Not just you, I'm that dead woman's son they're talking about. I know Willow's got you tangled up. Help me out, and you tell me everything you know. He crouched by the female, checking her over. Rubbing her belly, he eased out a bunch of pent-up gas, stinkier than a skunk. Phew, you've been holding that a while, he chuckled. Let's get that baby out. She ducked her head, embarrassed, while he worked. Grabbing a needle from his kit, he prepped to poke her belly. The male lunged again. What are you doing to her? Liam paused. Her insides are all knotted up, blocking the birth. I'm clearing the way. Ask her yourself. She nodded weakly. He's right, hon. I feel better already, baby's close. The male backed off, grateful. A few careful jabs later, a clutch of tiny snakes wriggled free. But then she cried out, collapsing again. Liam frowned, spotting a dark mark on her tail, a nasty curse, meant to kill her mid-birth. He grabbed his mom's peachwood, muttered a charm, and pressed it to the mark. It vanished, and with a final needle, one last egg popped out. Looks like this little fella was the holdup, Liam said. That curse was gunning for you, but it's gone now. You're free. The baby snakes swarmed their mom, chirping mama. The parents thanked him profusely, spilling all they knew about Willow's scheme. Liam's jaw tightened. I was planning to open Ma's grave tonight after sundown, he said. Now I reckon I can't wait. Liam stood under the big oak, uncorking one of his cider jugs. He poured it out slow, letting it soak into the dirt, and muttered a few words his mom had taught him. Moments later, the ground rumbled, splitting open beneath the tree to reveal a gaping hole. He stepped inside and found her grave, simple, just like she'd wanted. Kneeling, he bowed his head 3 times.
Sorry, maanantai, he whispered.
This day was bound to come. Gotta dig you up now. He signaled the male snake, who'd followed him down, to help. Together, they clawed at the earth, uncovering the coffin bit by bit. Just as it came into view, a figure in a black cloak dropped from the oak above, landing with a thud. A wild laugh echoed through the hollow. Finally opened it, huh? Hand over the treasure inside. Liam looked up, eyes narrowing. Quit playing games, Mr. Willow. I know it's you. The figure yanked off his hood, smirking. Well, ain't you a sharp one, he sneered. Turns out, this wasn't just Mr. Willow, he was Caleb Willard, once a fellow apprentice with Abigail under a backwoods preacher called Reverend Tate from Tiger Ridge. Abigail, folks said, had a spark of divine sight in her blood, maybe from some ancient holy line. Her gift for seeing the future outshone everyone, while Caleb, he'd always been a schemer, chasing shortcuts instead of the straight path. When he'd caught wind of Abigail's talents, Caleb tried brewing up some dark trick to steal her gift for himself. She'd caught him red-handed, and it flopped. Reverend Tate got wise to Caleb's crooked ways, kicked him out of the fold, and warned the others to steer clear. After that, Abigail left the ridge, aiming to use her skills for good, helping folks quietly, healing where she could. But wherever she went, her secrets leaked out, and Liam was sure Caleb was the one stirring the pot. After Abigail's husband passed, she'd hauled Liam from town to dodge Caleb's schemes. Kingston Hollow had been their safe haven for a decade, until now. Caleb, it turned out, had wormed his way into the Willow family by marrying into it. The old patriarch had been a decent sort, but after Caleb eyed the family's wealth, he'd used some foul hex to kill the man off. Then he'd bewitched the patriarch's 10-year-old daughter into marrying him. She'd figured out his game too late, died slamming her head against a wall in a fight with him, leaving a little girl behind. Caleb snatched up the estate, raising the kid as his own. Now 10 years later, the girl had grown into a beauty, and Caleb, twisted as ever, set his sights on her too. When she refused, he cursed her into that half-dead sleep, planning to wed her once he'd broken her will. The woman Liam had found in the hidden room? She was the last true Willow, scared witless that her stepdad was out to ruin her. As for that grain shed? It wasn't for grain, it was a trap to stash Caleb's cursed tools, ready to pull out when he needed them. He'd hired Liam to test him, see if Abigail had passed her gifts to her son. What he didn't count on was Abigail, on her deathbed, pouring her last ounce of spirit into Liam. Up in the heavens, she'd seen him heading to the Willow estate and called on a thunder spirit to zap him with half her hearing, letting him catch thoughts and animal talk. Caleb had been hunting Abigail's grave too, after a relic she'd buried with her, a charm called the first light. He'd even roped those snakes into his dirty work, hexing them to do his bidding. If Liam hadn't stepped in, they'd be dead by now. Snarling, Caleb bit his own hand, letting blood drip onto a strange artifact he pulled from his coat. A howling wind kicked up, ghostly gusts straight from the pits. Folks called it Hell's Breeze.
One touch, and you'd be torn apart. The wind charred Liam round the hollow.
He couldn't shake it. Desperate, he flung his mom's peachwood charm at it. The gusts died, but the charm split in two, its power spent. Caleb cackled, leaping down from the tree.
Peachwood's busted now. What else you got?
A light flared in his hand, growing brighter as he chanted. It swelled into a blazing orb and hurtled toward Liam. No dodging this one. Liam charged straight at Caleb instead, tackling him as the light hit. Locked together, they tumbled. Caleb squirmed, panic creeping in, and muttered another chant to snuff the orb out. Wriggling free, he yanked a dagger from his belt and stabbed Liam's arm. Liam let go, clutching the wound. Caleb, blood dripping from his mouth, looked half dead himself. "Where's your ma's first light?" he roared. "Hand it over or you're done." Before Liam could answer, a blade flashed, sinking into Caleb's back. He spun, jaw-dropping. It was the Willow Girl, awake and fierce. "You were cursed," he gasped. "How?" She glared, voice steady. "You wrecked my family." When Liam had left her, he'd lifted the hex with that peachwood and slipped a note under her pillow, directions to break the lock and escape. She'd followed him to the letter. Caleb howled, lashing out with his last strength. 4 glowing arrows shot from his hands, pinning everyone, Liam, the girl, the snakes, in a shimmering cage. His eyes blazed red as he unleashed every dark trick he had left, ready to finish them. The ground shook, mountains trembling, their heads pounding like they'd split. Then crack! Abigail's coffin burst open. A glowing bead floated out, the first light. It flared into a beam, locking Caleb in its glow. He screamed, dissolving into ash as the light faded, taking the relic with it. When the dust settled, Liam's strange hearing was gone. No more thoughts, no more animal chatter. Maybe that was for the best. The Willow Girl took back her family's estate, and taken with Liam's grit, married him. They had a passel of kids and lived happy ever after. Folks are born different, see. Some come into this world rotten, like Caleb Willard. Give a bad apple like that an inch, and he'll take your whole orchard. No mercy, no softness, or you'll pay for it. Caleb never aimed to walk the straight and narrow, just wanted power, any way he could grab it. That's why he ended up dust. Abigail, though? Even after Caleb's meddling got her husband killed, she never hunted revenge. She kept moving, kept quiet, doing good where she could. That kindness rubbed off on Liam, shaping him into a man who'd help folks, like those snakes or the Willow Girl, without a second thought. Saving her won him a wife and a good life. That's the reward for decency. So I reckon we ought to stick to the right path, spread some good, and build up blessings for the generations after us.
What do you think, friends?
That's the first tale done. Now, Nancy Thompson's got a second story coming your way. Don't miss it, I reckon it'll hook you from the get-go. It's an old yarn called The Kindly Couple and the Door of Fate, about a pair who did good deeds aplenty, a wife who couldn't bear kids, and a wandering preacher who fixed their luck by tearing down a door. Stay tuned. Alright folks, welcome back. That first tale's done, and now Nancy Thompson's got another one for you. This here's a story from the old Virginia frontier, back in the days when the colonies were still scrappy and new. It's about a couple who poured their hearts into helping folks, a wife who couldn't catch a break in the family way, and a wandering preacher who turned their luck around by ripping out a door. Buckle up, this one's gonna grab you right from the start. Our story kicks off in the time of the early settlers, round about the 1700s, in a little trading town called Rowansford, tucked into Lunenburg County, Virginia. There lived a man named Thomas Nelson, a decent soul who ran a cozy roadside inn with his wife Hannah. They served up hot cider and cornbread to travelers passing through, giving him a spot to rest their boots. Thanks to years of good neighbors and honest work, the Nelsons did all right for themselves, nothing fancy, but enough to keep the hearth warm. When their daughter Laura Nelson was 10, the apple harvest down south hit a bumper year. Prices dropped low, and Thomas saw a chance to stock up. He scraped together every penny he'd saved, called in some favors from trader pals, and sent for a big load of apples to store and sell later. Best way to haul 'em to Rowan's Ford was by river barge, quick and cheap. But wouldn't you know it, fate had other plans. A storm rolled in, waves crashed the barge, and the whole load sank to the bottom of the James River. Soggy apples ain't worth a dime. Thomas had to chuck the lot. When word got back to him, Thomas near lost his mind. All that money, gone in a blink. He took it hard, started moping around, barely eating. Before long, the gloom settled into his bones, and he came down with a fever that wouldn't quit. His health slid fast. One night, knowing the end was near, he called Laura to his bedside. "Laura, darlin'," he rasped, "I ain't got much time left. When I'm gone, you head to Lunenburg proper and find your Aunt Clara. She'll look after you." Clara and Thomas went way back, grew up thick as thieves. A few years prior, Clara's family had hit rough times, and Thomas bailed him out with cash and kindness. Ever since, they'd been tight. Just days before, Clara had swung by after hearing about the apple fiasco, checking on Thomas. She'd mentioned she was settled in Lunenburg now, running a seamstress shop called Clover Stitch, doing all right for herself. Thomas figured she'd take Laura in. Sure enough, a few days later Hannah, worn out from nursing Thomas, passed on too. The neighbors, seeing Laura orphaned at 10, pitched in to help. They buried Hannah next to Thomas in the town plot, a quiet spot under a willow. With both folks gone, Laura was on her own, but she clung to her dad's last words. She packed a small bundle and set off for Lunenburg to find Aunt Clara. It wasn't a far trek, just a day's walk from Rowan's Ford to Lunenburg.
Laura hit taunes dusk fell. The streets flickering with lantern light and butzing with folks winding down the day. She en vice hustle a bit. Alone kit in a strange place.
Asking around, she found her way to Clover Stitch, but the shop was locked up tight, everyone inside asleep. New to traveling and not knowing a soul, Laura slumped against a post out front, figuring she'd wait till morning. How long she sat there, she couldn't say. Eventually, the shop door creaked open, and out stepped a well-dressed woman, fancy coat, kind eyes. Laura perked up, rubbing sleep from her face. The woman spotted her and strolled over. "Well, hello there, little miss," she said with a warm smile.
"Watre you doin' out here all alone?"
Lost. Laura might have been green, but she had manners. She scrambled up, brushing her skirt. "Ma'am," she said, "I'm here lookin' for my Aunt Clara. My folks passed, and Ma told me Clara works here. I got in late, door was shut, so I'm waitin'." The woman's face softened. "Poor thing," she said.
"It ain't safe sittin' out here."
"How about I take you in to find her?" Laura grinned, shy but grateful. "Thank you, ma'am, but I'll wait. It's late, don't want to bother her rest." The woman chuckled, like a doting aunt, and patted Laura's head. "You're a smart one for your age, ain't you?" She plopped down beside Laura, and they chatted till the sky started to lighten. As dawn broke, the woman stood, stretching. "Laura Nelson, huh? Got your name now. We'll meet again, I reckon." With that, she wandered off, looking tuckered out. Laura waved goodbye, watching her go. By morning, the streets of Lunenburg stirred, peddlers hollering, folks shuffling about. Clover Stitch's door swung open again, and a young woman stepped out, spotting Laura by the post. "Hey kid," she called, "what are you sitting there for?" Laura hopped up. "Miss, I'm here for my Aunt Clara. Ma said to find her when she passed." The woman knew Clara, but she squinted, curious. "Who are you to her? What's the story?" Laura explained, "My folks died, and Ma told me to come here for Clara." The woman sized her up, young, earnest, no liar. "Hold on," she said. "I'll fetch her." Soon enough, Clara herself came rushing out, all flustered. She'd met Laura once back home and recognized her right off. "Laura!" Clara exclaimed, glancing around. "What are you doing here? Where's your ma?" At the mention of Hannah, Laura's eyes welled up. "Aunt Clara," she sobbed, "Ma's gone, passed a few days back. She told me to find you." Clara sighed, tears brimming. "You poor thing. Come on, you're with me now." She ushered Laura inside Clover Stitch. Seeing Laura's dusty clothes and worn shoes, Clara cleaned her up, washed her dress, found her a fresh pair of stockings. Once she was tidied, Laura looked like a new girl, bright face, lively spark. Clara sat her down. "So Laura, what's your plan?" Laura shrugged. She hadn't thought past finding Clara. Everything else was a blur. Clara nodded. "How about you stay here with me? Learn stitchin', sewing, embroidery, the works. We'll look out for each other, and you'll pick up a trade. Sound good?" Laura didn't fully grasp it, but she trusted Clara. "Whatever you say, Aunt Clara." Clara smiled. "All right then. I'll talk to the shop owner later, see if we can keep you on." She took Laura for breakfast, settling her in. Around mid-morning, the shop owner rolled in, a stern woman in her 40s named Martha Hale. Clara brought Laura over. "Martha," she said, "this here's my niece, Laura. Lost her folks, came to me. Can she stay and learn the trade?" Martha eyed Laura, who curtsied quick. "Clara, you're puttin' me in a spot," Martha said. "She's young, and we ain't short on seamstresses." Clara pressed. "She's sharp, Martha, quick learner. No folks to lean on. Take pity, won't you?" Martha softened a bit, she felt for Laura, but she hesitated, unsure what the big boss would think. Just then, the well-dressed woman from last night swept in. Clara and Martha greeted her with respect. She nodded back, then grinned at Laura. "Laura Nelson. Told you we'd meet again. Stay here, learn with Clara. Hope you make something of yourself." She breezed off toward the back of the shop. Clara and Martha gaped. Laura piped up, "That's the lady I talked to last night." Turns out, she was Eleanor Grayson, the owner of Clover Stitch. From then on, Laura stayed, training as a seamstress under Clara's wing. After that morning, Laura settled into Clover Stitch, learning the needle and thread alongside Aunt Clara. Chatting one day, she found out the kind woman from that first night was Eleanor Grayson, the big boss of the shop. Eleanor ran it with her late husband, Daniel Grayson, back in the early days. They'd built Clover Stitch from scratch, Eleanor handling the books, Daniel drumming up trade. They were a solid team. But just a year in, Daniel rode out to a neighboring county to seal a deal and got ambushed by bandits. They left him dead on the trail, widowing Eleanor and their toddler son, Charles. Eleanor didn't buckle. Smart and tough, she took the reins, growing Clover Stitch into a name folks knew all over Lunenburg. She raised Charles too, hired tutors when he was 3, drilling him in reading, writing, and arithmetic, plus fancier stuff like chess and sketching. Charles had ambition, wanted to make his mark and honor the family name. Eleanor often brought him by the shop, and that's how he met Laura. Charles was a year older, but they hit it off quick, 2 kids with big dreams. Whenever he visited, he'd hunt down Laura for a game or a chat. Time flew, and before long, they weren't kids anymore. Charles spent 10 years with his nose in books, studying hard by candlelight. It paid off. He aced the Colonial exams and landed a post as a clerk in Lunenburg's courthouse, a real feather in his cap. The governor's folks took notice, pegging him for bigger things. Laura wasn't idle either. Sharp as a tack and hardworking, she mastered stitching in just a few years. Her embroidery was something else, flowers and birds so lifelike, they practically jumped off the fabric. Customers came from miles around to buy her work. By the time they hit marrying age, Charles was a handsome fellow with a bright future, and Laura was a beauty with a knack for her craft. Eleanor saw it clear as day, they were a perfect match. In her mind, Laura was the ideal daughter-in-law. 8 years at Clover Stitch had shown Eleanor what Laura was made of: kind, diligent, clever, and a wizard with a needle. She couldn't ask for better. So, Eleanor sat down with Clara to hash it out. Clara was all for it. Charles and Laura tying the knot felt right. They split up to ask the pair. When Charles and Laura heard, they were tickled pink, already sweet on each other. They said yes without a hitch. Eleanor found a preacher to pick a lucky wedding day, 6 months out, on a crisp October 6th. With the date set, the Grayson house buzzed like a beehive. Lunenburg had an old custom: if someone was getting hitched, you spruced up the homestead. New couple, new start, made sense. The Grayson place was old, paint peeling, and Eleanor figured it was time for a facelift. Charles being a courthouse man now, they needed a home that matched his station. She decided to rebuild the front gate, something grand to set the tone. Word was, there was a carpenter in Lunenburg named Liam Carver, yep, our Liam from the first tale, settled down now. Folks swore by his work, solid, detailed, the best around. Eleanor sent her steward to hire him, and Liam agreed quick. He got to it fast, hammering away, though a few snags cropped up. Still, he finished before the wedding, gate standing tall and proud. Little did they know, that job would stir up trouble down the line. The big day came, and the Grayson house overflowed with guests. Charles and Laura tied the knot under a harvest moon, family and friends cheering him on. After the vows, they were thick as thieves, couldn't peel him apart if you tried. Eleanor, getting on in years, started thinking about handing over Clover Stitch. She nudged Laura to take the reins. Laura balked at first, but Eleanor wouldn't hear no, so she stepped up. 3 years zipped by. Under Laura's watch, Clover Stitch boomed, orders pouring in, money stacking up. The Grayson family grew into a proper household. But one thing gnawed at him: after 3 years wed, Laura's belly stayed empty. Charles hauled her to every doctor in Virginia. Big names, small-town healers, didn't matter. None could figure it out. No ailment we can see, they'd say, scribbling prescriptions for tonics and sending him home. Laura took it hard, swallowing bitter herbs and heartache. Charles hated seeing her suffer and called off the search. "We'll trust in good deeds," he told her. "Heaven'll smile on us yet." From then on, Charles and Laura made a pact. 1st and 15th of every month, they'd open their gates to the needy. Laura'd rise before dawn, cooking up pots of hearty grub, corn porridge, bean stew, whatever filled bellies. Charles had the help set up tables out front, and they'd dish out food and rest to anyone who stopped by. It became a regular thing, folks lining up long before the sun climbed high. One of those days, the Grayson yard was hopping, crowds chattering, praising the couple's generosity. Laura was ladling out porridge when a raspy voice cut through. "Ma'am, I'm just passin' through, mind sparin' a bowl?" She looked up and saw an old preacher, gray beard, patched cloak, leaning on a stick. Smiling, she said, "Reverend, you're too polite. I'll fix you right up." She handed him a steaming bowl. The preacher sipped slow, eyeing the place. His gaze landed on the new gate Liam had built, and his face darkened, like he'd seen a ghost. He turned to Laura. "Ma'am, that gate tells me this ain't no common house."
Courthouse folk, irekum.
Laura blushed, chuckling. "You've got a good eye, Reverend. My husband's a clerk, serves the colonies law." "Ain't bad," the preacher nodded. "When'd you put that gate up?" Laura thought back. 3 years ago, when we wed. Charles got his post then, and Ma Eleanor wanted the place fixed up proper. "Any trouble with it?" The preacher sighed. "Things been smooth here lately? Any little ones runnin' around?" Laura's jaw dropped. "Reverend, truth be told, we've been married over 3 years, no kids yet. You thinkin' the gate's got somethin' to do with it?" He shook his head slow. "Your man's a law clerk, right? By colony rules, a courthouse family's gate oughta have 25 studs, 5 across, 5 down, each side. Keeps the blessings flowin'. Yours ain't got 'em. Did that Carpenter skip it?" Laura blinked, spinning to check. Sure enough, no studs. "No way," she muttered. "Eleanor hired Liam Carver, best in Lunenburg. He's too good to miss that." The preacher stroked his beard. "Studs sound like sons, old saying. Means heirs, family. Regular folks skip 'em, but a clerk's house? Gotta have 'em." It clicked for Laura. No wonder kids hadn't come. "Reverend," she pressed, "how do we fix it?" He shrugged. "Simple. Tear that gate down, build a new one, studs and all." Finishing his porridge, he tipped his hat and shuffled off. Laura stood there, stunned, till the crowd snapped her out of it. That night, over supper, she spilled it all to Charles and Eleanor. Eleanor's face went red. "That no-good Liam," she snapped. Turns out, when she'd hired him, she'd fed him like a king, 3 squares a day, no skimping. Liam worked hard, gate half done when Eleanor checked it out. It looked fine, carvings sharp, studs in place. But then she slipped, crashed into it, and the thing splintered. Inside? Sawdust stuffing, not solid wood. She'd chewed Liam out, called him greedy, wasting her trust. He'd rebuilt it proper, solid oak, and she'd let it slide in the wedding rush. The studs? Slipped her mind. Charles and Laura traded looks. "So that's it," Charles said. Eleanor wanted to track Liam down, but they waved her off. No point in grudges, Laura said. They tore the gate down next day, hired another carpenter, and put up a new one, 25 studs, just like the preacher ordered. And wouldn't you know it, peace settled in, and a year later, Laura bore a chubby baby boy. The Graysons lived happy and full ever after. Well folks, that ain't quite the end of the Grayson tale. Life rolled on in Lunenburg, and Laura and Charles settled into their new roles, parents to a bouncing baby boy they named Daniel, after Charles's late pa. The new gate stood proud out front, its 25 studs gleaming in the Virginia sun, and Clover Stitch hummed along under Laura's steady hand. Charles kept busy at the courthouse, climbing the ranks with his knack for law and order. The Grayson name was solid now, folks tipped their hats when they passed by. Little Daniel grew fast, a chubby rascal with his ma's bright eyes and his pa's stubborn streak. By his first birthday, he was toddling around, tugging at Laura's skirts while she stitched. The townsfolk loved him, called him Danny Boy, and slipped him bits of molasses candy when they stopped by for embroidery. Laura and Charles kept up their good deeds too, dishing out porridge and stew every 1st and 15th, just like before. That preacher's words had stuck with them, kindness paid off, and they weren't about to let it slide. But peace don't last forever in these old tales, does it? About 2 years after Danny came along, whispers started drifting through Lunenburg. Travelers passing through Rowan's Ford, where Laura's folks had run their inn, brought news of strange doings. Folks said the old Nelson place, abandoned since Hannah's passing, was stirring. Lights flickered in the windows at night, and some swore they heard voices, soft, like a woman calling out. A few braver souls peeked inside and found the hearth cold but the air thick with something uncanny. Laura caught wind of it one morning while serving porridge. A grizzled trader, spooning up her bean stew, muttered, "Heard tell your old home's haunted, ma'am. Lights dancin', voices moanin', ain't natural." Laura's spoon froze midair. "That's so," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Been empty nigh on 15 years. Probably just critters or squatters." The trader shrugged. "Maybe. But I'd check it myself if I were you." That night, she told Charles over supper. Eleanor, rocking Danny by the fire, perked up too. "Haunted." Charles frowned. "Sounds like tall tales, wind and shadows playin' tricks." Laura wasn't so sure. "Could be, but it's Ma and Pa's place. If something's off, I ought to see for myself." Eleanor nodded. "Take Charles with you. I'll mind Danny. Ain't right leavin' it to fester." So a few days later, they hitched up a cart and rode out to Rowan's Ford. The trip was short, but the closer they got, the heavier the air felt, like a storm brewing with no clouds in sight. The old inn loomed ahead, weathered and sagging, vines choking the porch. Laura's chest tightened, memories of her folks hit hard. Charles squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out, darlin'." They stepped inside, boards creaking underfoot. Dust coated everything, but the place looked untouched, no squatters, no critters. Then Laura froze. A faint glow flickered from the back room, her folks' old bedroom. "You seein' that?" she whispered. Charles nodded, jaw tight, and drew a lantern from the cart. They crept forward, the light steady but the glow ahead pulsing like a heartbeat. In the room, the air hummed. No fire burned, but a soft voice, Hannah's voice, drifted out. "Laura, darlin', been waitin'." Laura's knees buckled. "Ma?" she choked. Charles gripped her shoulder, lantern shaking. The glow flared, and there stood Hannah, or something like her, pale and shimmering. "Don't be scared," she said. "I lingered, 'cause I had to see you safe. You've done good, girl, better'n I dreamed. But there's a shadow here needs clearin'." Laura blinked back tears. "What shadow, Ma?" Hannah's form wavered. "That apple bust, it weren't just bad luck. A fella cursed us, jealous of your pa's trade. He's gone now, but his spite stuck. I've held it back, but I can't no more. You gotta break it." Charles stepped up. "How?" Hannah smiled faint. "Burn what's left of the old cider press out back. That's where he hexed it. Then I can rest." Laura and Charles didn't waste time. They bolted out back, the night thick around them. The old cider press squatted in the yard, half-rotted but still standing, a rickety frame Thomas had built to squeeze apples for the inn's brew. Laura remembered him tinkering with it, laughing as juice splashed her pinafore. Now it felt wrong, like a splinter festering in the land. Charles fetched an axe from the cart and hacked at it, till the wood splintered. Laura piled the pieces, her hands trembling but sure. "You reckon this'll work?" she asked. Charles wiped sweat from his brow. "If your ma says so, I trust it." They doused the heap with lantern oil and struck a flint. Flames roared up, licking the night sky, and a sharp sour wind howled, like something trapped was clawing free. The fire burned hot and fast. As the last plank crumbled to ash, the air lightened. Laura felt it, a weight lifting, like a sigh let loose. Back inside, Hannah's glow waited. "That's it," she said, softer now. "Shadows gone. I can go too." Laura reached out, tears spilling. "Ma, don't, I just got you back." Hannah shook her head. "You've got your own family now, darlin'. Me and your pa, we're proud. Live well, that's enough." Charles pulled Laura close as Hannah faded, her light winking out. The inn went still, no voices, no glow, just an old house settling into quiet. They stood there a spell, letting it sink in. "She's right," Charles murmured. "We've got Danny, the shop, each other. Time to let him rest." Laura nodded, wiping her face. "Yeah. Let's go home." They rode back to Lunenburg at dawn, the cart rattling over the rutted road. Eleanor met him at the gate, Danny squirming in her arms. "All sorted?" she asked. Laura smiled, weary but sure. "Sorted and done, Ma. No more shadows." From then on, the Graysons thrived. No hauntings, no hexes. Danny grew strong, and a couple years later, a little sister joined him, Clara, named for her aunt. Folks in Lunenburg still talk about him, the kindly couple who fed the poor, faced down a curse, and built a legacy of good. That preacher was right, do right by others, and fate'll do right by you. So what's your take, friends? That's the tale of the Graysons, start to finish. If you liked it, holler in the comments, subscribe, share, all that jazz. Nancy Thompson's got more yarns where this came from. See you next time. Time marched on in Lunenburg, and the Grayson household blossomed like a well-tended garden. Laura and Charles raised Daniel, Danny Boy, as the town called him, and his little sister Clara with love and grit. By now, Danny was 5, a wiry kid with a mop of brown curls and a knack for mischief, while Clara, at 2, toddled after him, babbling half-words and clutching rag dolls. Clover Stitch thrived under Laura's hands, her embroidery fetching top dollar from Richmond merchants, and Charles had climbed to magistrate in the courthouse, a respected man in a powdered wig. Eleanor, graying but spry, doted on the grandkids, spinning tales by the fire. The family stuck to their roots, opening the gates every 1st and 15th for the needy. Folks came from all over Lunenburg County, grateful for a hot meal and a kind word. But one crisp November morning, as Laura stirred a pot of chestnut porridge, a new face shuffled up, an old woman, bent like a willow branch, wrapped in a tattered shawl. Her eyes were sharp though, cutting through the crowd straight to Laura. "Bless you, ma'am," she croaked, taking a bowl. "Heard tell you're good folk. Got a minute for an old soul?" Laura smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Always, Granny. What's on your mind?" The woman slurped her porridge, then leaned in close. "There's a well 'bout a mile east o' here, down by the old mill road. Been dry since I was a girl, but lately it's whisperin'. Voices at night, soft, like children cryin'. Ain't right." Laura's brow furrowed. "A well? Ain't heard of it talkin' before." The old woman nodded. "Folks steer clear, say it's cursed. But you Graysons, you've got away with shadows. Thought you'd want to know." She finished her bowl and hobbled off, leaving Laura with a chill she couldn't shake. That night, she told Charles and Eleanor over supper. Danny and Clara were abed, the house quiet save for the crackling hearth. "Whisperin' well?" Charles snorted, sipping his cider. "Sounds like old wives' tales, wind whistlin' through the stones." Eleanor set her knitting down, eyes narrowing. "Maybe, but we thought the same 'bout your ma's in, Laura. Turned out true. I'd check it, if only for peace o' mind." Laura nodded. Granny seemed sure. "I'll go tomorrow, see what's what." Charles sighed. "All right, but I'm comin' too. Can't have you pokin' round haunted wells alone." Next day, they saddled up and rode east, the mill road winding through bare trees and frost-kissed fields. A mile out they found it, an old stone well crumbling and overgrown, its bucket long rotted away. The air hung heavy, like before a storm, though the sky was clear. Laura peered down the shaft. Black as pitch but faint, like a breeze carrying words, she heard it, soft sobs, whispers weaving together. Help, cold, lost. Charles lit a lantern and dangled it down on a rope. The light caught nothing but damp walls, yet the voices grew sharper. Kids, Laura gasped. Sounds like kids down there. Charles frowned. Can't be, too deep, too dry. Maybe it's echoes playing tricks. But Laura's gut twisted. No, it's real. Something's trapped. She remembered Hannah's ghost, the curse on the cider press. This felt kin to that. They rode back, fetching a longer rope and a sturdy ladder from the shed. By noon, Charles was lowering himself into the well, Laura gripping the rope above. Careful, she called. He grunted, boots scraping stone. Halfway down he hollered, there's a ledge, big enough to stand on. The whispers spiked, urgent now. Laura tied off the rope and climbed after him, heart pounding. On the ledge, a narrow crack split the wall, just wide enough to squeeze through. Charles held the lantern as they edged inside, finding a small cavern, cold, damp, and littered with bones. Tiny bones. Laura clapped a hand over her mouth. Lord above, in the corner, two faint shapes flickered, ghostly outlines of children, a boy and girl, no older than Danny and Clara. Their voices trembled. We fell, so long ago, can't climb out. Charles knelt, voice soft. Who are you, little ones? The boy's shade flickered. Jed and Polly. Pa dug this well, we was playin', fell in. He couldn't get us out. Laura's eyes stung. How long? Polly's ghost whispered, years, don't know cold. Charles traded a look with Laura. We'll get you free, he promised. Back topside, Laura rummaged through their gear. We need something to break whatever's holdin' him, she said. Charles nodded. Like your ma's trick, fire worked then. They gathered dry brush and hauled it down, piling it in the cavern. Laura pulled a flint from her pocket, but paused. Wait, bones mean bodies. We oughta bury 'em proper. Charles agreed. Right. Let's fetch 'em up first. They climbed down again, carefully gathering the fragile remains into a sack. The ghosts watched, silent now, their glow dimming. Hauling the bones up took hours, slow, reverent work. By dusk, they dug a small grave under an oak near the well, laying Jed and Polly to rest with a whispered prayer. Go easy now, Laura said, tossing dirt over the sack. But the whispers lingered, faint from the well. Still stuck, Charles muttered. They returned to the cavern, sparking the brush pile. Flames crackled, smoke curling up the shaft. The ghosts flickered brighter, voices rising. Warm, thank you, Laura called down. What's keepin' you? Jed's shade pointed to a rusted iron ring bolted to the wall. Pa's anchor, he dropped it tryin' to save us. It's holdin' us. Charles grabbed a hammer from his belt and smashed the ring loose, sparks flying. The metal clattered to the stone, and a rush of wind, clean not cursed, swept through. The ghosts flared, then softened. Polly smiled, faint as a dream. We're free, tell Ma and Pa we're sorry. They faded, leaving the cavern still. Laura and Charles climbed out, weary but light. The well was quiet, no whispers, no weight. They rode home under a starry sky, finding Eleanor pacing the porch with Danny and Clara asleep inside. Well, she demanded. Laura grinned. Two lost kids, stuck since their pa's day.
We sat in luz e buria de improper.
Charles added, burned out a curse too. Place is clean now. Word spread quick. Folks started calling it Grayson's Well, a tale of mercy over mystery. The family kept on, feeding the poor, raising their own, living right. Danny grew into a scholar like his pa, Clara a seamstress like her ma. And that old woman? She swung by next month, eyes twinkling. Knew you'd fix it, she said, taking her porridge. Some shadows just need good hearts to chase 'em off. So there you go, friends, another Grayson yarn. Kindness, courage, and a touch of the strange. What's your reckonin'? Drop a line below, hit that subscribe, and share it round. Nancy Thompson's got plenty more tales brewin'. Catch you next time. Years kept turning in Lunenburg, and the Grayson household stood as a pillar in the community. Daniel, Danny Boy, was pushing 8 now, a lanky kid with a quick mind and a habit of asking questions that stumped even Charles. Clara, at 5, had her mother's knack for stitching, threading needles almost as fast as Laura. Clover Stitch was a bustling hub, its shelves stocked with Laura's embroidery and orders piling up from as far as Williamsburg. Charles, now a full-fledged magistrate, wore his robes with pride, settling disputes and keeping Lunenburg's law in line. Eleanor still held court by the fireplace, her tales growing wilder with each grandkid's giggle. The family's tradition of opening their gates on the 1st and 15th held strong. Rain or shine, Laura cooked up vats of hearty fare, venison stew, cornbread, apple mash, and Charles marshaled the help to serve it. The townsfolk counted on it, and the Graysons never let him down. One blustery March morning, as Laura ladled out steaming broth, a stranger rode up on a gaunt horse. He was tall, wiry, with a weathered coat and a hat pulled low. A silver coin glinted in his hand as he dismounted, eyeing the crowd. "Fine spread you got here, ma'am," he said, voice gravelly. "Mind if I join?" Laura smiled, handing him a bowl. "Alry welcome, mister. Take your fill." He nodded, flipping the coin her way. It spun through the air, landing in her palm, heavy, cold, stamped with a symbol she didn't recognize, a coiled snake round a star. "Keep that," he said. "Payment for your trouble." Before she could protest, he took his broth and melted into the line. Laura tucked the coin in her apron, figuring it was just a traveler's quirk. But that night, trouble brewed. Danny woke screaming, thrashing in his sheets. "Snake! Snake in the dark!" he cried. Laura rushed in, soothing him, but his eyes were wide, like he'd seen something real. Charles checked the room, nothing but shadows. "Bad dream," he muttered, though he shot Laura a worried look. Next night, Clara bolted awake too, sobbing about his sin star. By the third night, both kids were feverish, tossing and mumbling about snakes and cold eyes. Laura's stomach knotted. She pulled the coin from her apron, turning it over in the firelight. That snake star mark, it matched their dreams. "Charles," she said, voice tight, "this ain't no coincidence. That stranger, he left this, and now the kids," Eleanor, rocking by the hearth, frowned. "Looks like a hex coin. Old trappers used them to curse rivals. Payback dressed up as a gift. You best find that fella." Next morning, Laura asked around town. A peddler remembered him, a drifter named Silas Reed, headed west toward the Blue Ridge after stopping at the Grayson Gate. "Had a mean look," the peddler said. "Muttered something 'bout settlin' scores." Charles saddled up. "I'll track him. You stay with the kids." Laura shook her head. "We're in this together. Ma can watch em." Eleanor agreed, shooing em off. "Go, I'll keep Danny and Clara safe." They rode west, the coin cold in Laura's pocket. 2 days out, they hit a trading post nestled in the foothills. A grizzled trapper there knew Silas. "Passed through yesterday," he grunted. Camped up by Hollow Creek, surly cuss, kept to himself. Laura and Charles pressed on, reaching the creek by dusk. Smoke curled from a lean-to, and there sat Silas, hunched over a fire, sharpening a knife. Charles stepped forward, hand on his pistol. "Silas Reed." The man looked up, eyes glinting. "Who's a skin?" Laura held up the coin. "You gave me this. Now my kids are sick, dreams of snakes, fevers. What'd you do?" Silas smirked, tossing his knife aside. "That coin's a reckonin'. Your man's a magistrate, sent my brother to the gallows 3 years back for stealin' horses. Figured I'd repay the favor." Charles's jaw tightened. "I judge fair, Reed. If your brother hung, he earned it. Undo this now." Silas laughed, bitter. "Ain't so easy. Coin's cursed, blood debts in it. They'll sicken till it's paid." Laura's blood ran hot. "They're kids, you coward. Break it or I'll make you." Silas sneered, pulling a pouch from his coat. "Takes more 'en threats. Needs blood to undo blood." Charles lunged, pinning Silas to the ground. "You'll fix this, or you'll wish you had." Silas squirmed, but Charles was stronger. Laura grabbed the pouch, Inside was a vial of dark liquid and a scrap of parchment scrawled with strange runes. "What's this?" she demanded. Silas spat. "Witch's brew. My kin paid a hag to hex it. Blood o' the wronged," they said. "Smear it on the coin and burn it. Might lift it. Might not." Laura's hands shook, but she nodded. "We'll try. You're comin' with us." They tied Silas's wrists and hauled him back to Lunenburg, riding hard. Danny and Clara were worse when they got home, pale, shivering, muttering in their sleep. Eleanor met him at the door, face grim. "They're fadin'. Hurry." Laura set the coin on the hearth, uncorked the vial, and dabbed the stinking liquid over the snake star mark. It hissed, like water on hot iron. Charles struck a flint, and they tossed the coin into the fire. Flames flared green, a sharp wail cutting the air. Silas flinched, cursing under his breath. The coin melted, black smoke curling up the chimney. Laura held her breath, watching the kids. Slowly, their fevers broke, color crept back into their cheeks, and the muttering stopped. Danny blinked awake first.
"Maanantai, he croaked."
Clara stirred next, yawning. Laura near collapsed with relief, hugging him tight. Silas slumped, defeated. "It's done," he muttered. Charles hauled him up. "You're fastened the law now. Attempted harm don't sit light with me." They locked him in the cellar till morning, then dragged him to the courthouse. Silas got 5 years in the stocks. Charles made sure it stuck. The trapper's grudge fizzled out, and Lunenburg buzzed with the tale. The Graysons beat a curse with guts and fire. After that, life settled again. Danny and Clara bounced back, tougher than ever. Danny spinning yarns about outsmarting snakes, Clara stitching serpents into her samplers. Laura and Charles kept the gates open, feeding folks, proving kindness could outlast spite. One day, that old woman from the well tale swung by again, grinning over her stew. "Heard you licked another shadow," she said. "Ain't surprised, good hearts win out." So there's another chapter, friends, vengeance undone, family saved. Reckon it's a lesson, sow spite, and you'll reap chains, sow good, and you'll stand tall. What's your take? Holler below, subscribe, share it round. Nancy Thompson's got more where this came from. See you next time.